Hello, today we're going to talk about fresh mozzarella curd from BelGioioso cheese. Now, fresh mozzarella curd is the most natural way of getting a true flavor of fresh mozzarella. In curd, we have a standard regular curd and we also have our platinum. These are both have a pH level of 5.7. In addition to that, we also offer 5.8 and 5.9. Those are the three basic variations or standard variations of pH that you're looking for. Now you may ask, why is it so important on pH? If the pH is a little too low, then what will happen is that cheese will not set up for you to actually dissolve. And if it's too high, then you're gonna get something that's not gonna meld together and probably gonna be too tough. So while 0.7 to 0.8 and 0.9 doesn't sound like much, it is a very important factor to keep in mind. The other is that if you're going to do hand stretching, which we're going to demonstrate today, you always want to use the lowest one available, which in this case would be the 5.7. What I have here in front of me is actually going to be an example of the curd that we'll be stretching today. You can see that it's pretty dry, has a few voids in it, versus the finished product, which is going to be nice and smooth and elastic and milky and flavorful. So to begin, you always want to have some safety, so let's make sure we get our gloves on. And to prepare, what we're going to do is actually take the curd, which as you see here would be a 10-pound piece, which is pretty standard. We also offer a 20-pound block as well. You then need to break this down. Right now what this is nothing more than milk solids. So in the process of creating fresh mozzarella curd, at BelGioioso we take the milk in from America's Dairyland. What we'll actually do is take off the whey, skim off the cream as well, and what you're left with is milk solids, okay? So nothing more than milk solids here at the end of the day. From here, we then are gonna need to go through the process of stretching to meld the proteins and get them to get together as it's part of a pasta filata family. The pasta filata family of cheese is a stretched cheese. So, to begin, you take the curd and you wanna break this down into roughly 1 to 2 inch pieces. The point being that we need to get the curd into a workable stage. And what we're doing here is we break it up. You can see how dry it is. We're just gonna simply spread it out into the bottom of the bowl. The purpose of spreading this into the bottom of the bowl is simply so that when we add the warm water and hot water to it, it melds together evenly. If you were to just put a big chunk, you wouldn't get consistency in the melding of the proteins together. Now some people will do it by hand as I'm doing here. Some may actually use a knife. Other folks recommend using a cheese guitar, which is nothing more than a wire string. Either method, whichever method you select to choose is fine. The point being is you want to get down to smaller workable pieces and coat the bottom of the bowl. Once you've done that, you basically have your curd at the bottom of the bowl here. Now, keep in mind, we need to work quickly when we're stretching curd. It's not like we can stretch 20 pounds at a time unless your hands are super fast. So what we're doing here is about 1.5 pounds, roughly, to 2 pounds of fresh curd. At this point, we will then introduce hot water. Now, this curd has been taken straight out of refrigeration, which is the way most operators are going to be working with the curd. Because of that, you need to do a 2-step method in heating the curd. So the first, we're going to call it tempering. And all we're going to do is take water here that's slightly below boiling, roughly at about 167, and we're going to slowly add it to the outside of the bowl. And what we're trying to achieve here is just to submerge the curd. It doesn't need to be drowning in water, but it just needs to be submerged simply so that it's covered. And we're tempering, we're bringing it up to temperature. Now if you notice, the water I put in obviously was clear. But we're already starting to get a little cloudiness in the bowl itself. And that cloudiness is actually butterfat, which is very, very important when you're crafting cheese. Butterfat is flavor at the end of the day. So now as you've seen, I've not worked it. I've simply had it submerged in water, and you see how the water's getting cloudy. But what I'm looking for at the end of the day is now, instead of those little pieces, I'm starting to get a little bit of a meld. And this is what we're looking for where now it's tempered. So at this point, we'll simply dump this water. And now we'll come in with more hot water to actually do the stretch. I prefer to put it on the outside and not directly onto the cheese. Ultimately, yes, the water will get onto the cheese, but I prefer to do it on the outside simply to try to minimize the shock. Remember that what we're trying to achieve here is something that's very soft, elastic, slight eggshell finish on the outside, but at the end we want that nice lactic flavor on the inside. Now, at this point here, because we're hand stretching, I would recommend you add salt. And the reason we recommend that is if you add it now, it will get more evenly dispersed throughout the curd. Some people prefer to add salt strictly in the brining stage of the cheese, but at that point, depending on how long you brine, it may just be on the surface or it may actually penetrate into the body of the cheese. So because I have roughly about 1.5 pounds, I'm using maybe a tablespoon of salt and just adding that straight into my hot water. And again, as you noticed, I haven't done anything to knead or move it much, but we are getting cloudiness. I'm trying to eliminate that as much as possible, or reduce it at least. Now that we have the salt, the process is nothing more than pushing back and forth, lifting, and letting gravity be your friend. You can see how now we went from those clumps and we're starting to meld together. Again, this is something that would not be achievable if you're using a curd whose pH level is going to be too high. Conversely, if it was too low, you would see it dissolving into little pieces. So now we're starting to get a little bit of the stretch. The goal at the end of the day is to get this entire pound, 1.5 pounds of cheese together and have a nice, smooth, velvety sheen to it. And get as many of the lumps as possible out. And we are trying to achieve that by not overworking it. So the lifting, this is the stretch of the mozzarella or pasta filata cheeses. The other cheeses that BelGioioso crafts that are part of the pasta filata family would be provolone, as well as low moisture mozzarella. And to give you an idea of the water again, we are clouding up, and that's just strictly from lifting up and down. So you can imagine if I was squeezing and really working this curd, you would have water that would be extremely cloudy, and unfortunately you'd have cheese that's very tough and it would lack flavor. So now we're just about getting to the point where we can start forming. You can tell we no longer have those multitude of chunks that I started with, and you can kind of see a little bit of a sheen on the side. So at this point now, what I have here is actually just going to be nothing more than cold water. Some people like to do an ice bath. We prefer to just use cold tap water. We don't want to necessarily shock the cheese. We're just going to try to cool it. We will lift up. This is our curd now that's all melded together. The proteins are together the way we want. And we prefer to kind of roll it out into a ribbon type shape. So straight out across the top, pinch off on the back. And from here you can now start forming whatever shape and size you'd like. I'm going to go for an ovalini, which is roughly a 4 ounce. Now because I'm right-handed, my left hand is strictly the guide. Not squeezing with the left, but tucking underneath with the right, much like you would in a dough ball. Once you get to the desired size, you pinch it off. On the back is the tail, which is referred to as the mozza, hence the name mozzarella. So you would just continue to do this until you use up all of your curd. Again, cold tap water, we're going to want it in that cold tap water for about 3 to 5 minutes roughly, just so it gets a little bit of an eggshell sheen. The purpose of tucking underneath is yes to form the shape, but also to try to get as much of the air bubbles out in the center. You want something that has melded together cleanly. We'll find out how good we did when we actually slice into it. So there we go. Now while we wait for this to set up a little bit, we'll talk a little bit about the uses of fresh mozzarella. The most common use that everyone is aware of obviously is going to be the caprese salad, which is nothing more than fresh mozzarella, maybe some nice 5x7 vine-ripened tomatoes, a little basil. Some people like olive oil, salt, pepper. Some people like to put balsamic. But a salad has always been more traditional, if you will, method of enjoying fresh mozz. Lately, the largest growing and utilization of fresh mozzarella has been actually in a sandwich format. This is something that has really grown immensely. In the United States, and especially, you've seen this now go into more of the QSR segment. You're seeing this at sandwich facilities, high-end delis, also seeing it on pizzerias as well. The margarita pizza is a very common use for fresh mozzarella also. At the end of the day, keep in mind, this is a fresh cheese and it's a mild cheese. It's meant to take on whatever flavor you add to it. So this is why people will add a little olive oil, maybe a little salt, maybe a little balsamic. Some people like to add a little pesto. It takes on whatever flavor you add to it and becomes a carrier for you. The versions that we offer, aside from curd that would be freshly stretched, you also have a water pack fresh mozzarella that has a shelf life of 37 days from date of manufacturing. We also offer thermoform or cryovac, which has 60 days of shelf life. The difference between the two is strictly the shelf life and maybe a slight difference in the terms of the texture of the cheese. Thermoform, being that it's in a dry pack, will be slightly firmer, but at the end of the day, as long as you let it temper up and get the room temperature, you have the same delicious flavor you're always looking for. So you may ask, if we have this available, why would you want to stretch? This is the truest form of fresh mozzarella at the end of the day. By virtue of its name, it's designed to be enjoyed fresh. Okay, so now let's see how our work turned out. This has been chilling for 3 to 4 minutes. I'm going to bring this dark plate in just so you can see the better contrast of our work. You'll see now how it's holding up together nicely. We don't have any smudging or any rolling out of the product, so far so good, but the proof is always in the pudding. Let's see what we have on the inside. Not bad. A couple of little voids, but at the end of the day, you have a nice, beautiful shot of fresh mozzarella to enjoy. Again, this is the most traditional way that mozzarella was designed to be enjoyed in Italy.